Ever since I moved into this HOA-dominated neighborhood, I knew I was in for a headache, but I never imagined that I would have to deal with a professional package thief dressed up as a model housewife. The neighborhood was a circus of ridiculous rules. If the grass was a centimeter longer than allowed, a fine. If the garbage can was visible for more than 15 minutes after collection, fine. If your house didn't have the color approved by the HOA Aesthetic Committee, fine. And who was the #1 enforcer of all these absurd rules? Her, the woman who spent the day peering through the window, noting down any insignificant detail that she could turn into an official complaint. The self-appointed president of the HOA, who not only liked to boss others around, but believed she actually had the right to do so. The problem started with the casual visits. She would knock on my door with that little smile of someone who takes pleasure in making other people's lives hell. At first, I tried to look friendly. "Hi, I noticed that your fence is a little out of alignment. Maybe you'd like to take a look at it before someone from the HOA sees it and complains." As if she herself wasn't the person who would be complaining 5 minutes later. Then the notes began. Little notes folded up and shoved under the door. "Your car was parked 5 centimeters beyond the correct alignment. Please adjust. The HOA recommends that the colors of your balcony match the rest of the house. Thank you. Please remember to cut the grass by the deadline set by the maintenance committee." One joke after another. But it was when my packages started disappearing that I realized the problem went far beyond her mania for controlling everything. At first, I thought it was Amazon's mistake. Maybe the couriers were leaving the packages at the wrong address. But after 3 missing orders, I started to notice a pattern. My packages were disappearing the very moment I left the house. And the one person who was always around at that time? Her. The woman who always picked on me, who had already turned my existence into a personal power play, had now decided that my packages were hers too. I decided to remove the doubt in the simplest way. I installed a camera on the balcony. The next morning, I placed a small order, just to test it out, something cheap, with no real value, just to see what happened. When the delivery notification arrived on my cell phone, I opened the camera and waited. And, like clockwork, it appeared. First, she did her usual little act. She left her house holding her cell phone, as if she was busy answering an important message. She walked slowly down the sidewalk, in no hurry. But when she arrived in front of my house, she quickly looked around, bent down and picked up the package with the speed of an illusionist. Then, without even hesitating, he walked on and entered her house as if nothing had happened. I was most struck by the look on her face. The woman wasn't even trying to disguise it. She knew no one would do anything. She knew she was the HOA's protégé, that no one would have the courage to confront her. I was nobody. And that's when I decided that instead of simply calling the police or confronting her with the video, I would do something much, much better. I did some research and found exactly what I needed. A website specializing in urban pests. And among the options available, there was a special box full of aggressive wasps. The ad was clear. Hunting wasps. Territorial and extremely defensive. Exactly what I wanted. I bought the box and paid the postage as quickly as possible. The next day, when the package arrived, I set about preparing it for the best trap of my life. I put the package on the balcony, clearly visible. The woman was already watching. I could feel it. And then I waited. I waited for the exact moment when the neighborhood thief would finally pick up the wrong package. She arrived at the usual time, pretending that she was just walking down the street, as she did every day. But this time, she didn't know that she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. With the confident movements of someone who has done this dozens of times, she picked up the package and entered her own house. And it was at that moment that I knew my revenge was about to begin. I grabbed my coffee, sat down on the sofa, and prepared myself for the big moment. Because, in just a few minutes, she was going to open that box. And when she did, true justice would be served. The plan was in motion. After months of dealing with this woman stealing my packages at the drop of a hat, I had finally set the perfect trap. Now, all I had to do was sit on my sofa, drink my coffee, and wait. And, oh, how I waited, because I knew that in a few minutes, chaos would ensue. The woman entered the house with the package under her arm, not even suspecting what she was holding. To her, it was probably another free gift that the universe, or her unbridled arrogance, had given her. Perhaps she was hoping it was something expensive, a gadget, a pair of sneakers, a new electronic. But unfortunately for her, it was just a miniature apocalypse waiting to be unleashed. So I waited. I waited until I heard the first scream. It was loud, quick, and full of surprise. But the second was much better. It was the kind of scream you hear when someone realizes, too late, that they've made the worst possible decision. I sipped my coffee and went to the window, keeping a neutral expression. But inside, I was already doubled over with laughter. The door to her house opened wide, slamming against the wall. And then she appeared, desperate, running like a convict. And of course, she wasn't alone. Behind her, coming out of the house like avenging angels from hell, were them, the wasps. Dozens of little flying demons buzzing furiously, seeking revenge for being trapped inside that box. And they had found the perfect target. The woman tried to fend them off in desperation, waving her arms and slapping her body as if she were trying to get rid of invisible flames. But it was no use. Every move only made the wasps even angrier. Suddenly, she tripped. The heels she was wearing, because, of course, this woman couldn't just be wearing slippers indoors, twisted in a strange way, and, in the blink of an eye, she fell face first into her own garden. It was the most beautiful scene I'd ever seen. But it only got better. Just when I thought the day couldn't get any more glorious, her husband appeared at the door. Now, I've never seen a man so lost in his life. He looked at his wife rolling in the grass, screaming like she was on fire, and then saw the swarm of angry wasps flying around her. For a second, he looked like he was going to do something. Maybe help, maybe run to her and try to scare the wasps away. But then, he simply stepped back and closed the door. Closed. A door. And I completely lost my composure. I had to hold on to the wall to keep from falling to the floor from laughing so hard. The guy had simply left his wife to die. By now, the neighbors were watching. Some were outside, others were just peeking through the windows. But everyone was watching the greatest spectacle this neighborhood has ever seen. And then came what I had been waiting for. The first sting. She screamed in a way that made me think she might have been struck by lightning. But no, it was just a wasp digging its stinger into her neck. Seconds later came the second. Then the third. The woman stood up as if she had been possessed, running around aimlessly, trying to get away from something that was already stuck to her. And that's when she made the worst possible choice. In sheer desperation, with the wasps still stuck to her, she ran back home. Where more wasps were still flying around, the door slammed behind her, muffling her screams. And then the real hell began. You could hear furniture being dragged, things falling, doors slamming, and her screams? Louder and louder. Her husband? Well, he didn't open the door again. He was probably locked in some room, praying that the wasps would have mercy on him. The HOA? Absolute silence. The neighbors? Oh, the neighbors were trying not to laugh. And me? I just stood there, watching her house turn into pandemonium, while thinking about what I would do if she tried to take revenge after that. The screams continued for at least 5 minutes. 5 minutes of pure panic, of a woman screaming as if she were being attacked by a swarm of winged demons. Technically, that's exactly what was happening. Outside, the neighbors didn't know whether to laugh or call someone. Most just watched, peering through the windows or pretending to be watering the garden while trying to hold in their laughter. Me? I was already laughing without disguising it, because I knew that, inside that house, chaos was consuming every corner. The woman had nowhere to run. Every time she tried to flee to another room, the wasps went with her. Every attempt to hide only made matters worse. From the noise, she must have been running all over the house, knocking over everything in her path. And then came the moment I'll never forget. The living room curtain blew aside, and there she was, again. But now she looked like she'd been through an apocalypse. Her hair, which had once been neat and sprayed, was now completely disheveled, sticking up everywhere. Her face, normally covered in flawless makeup, was now red, swollen, and probably burning like hell. She was shaking. Her eyes were wide open, completely upset, as if she had just left a battlefield. And then, finally, she ran out of the house again. Only this time she didn't trip. This time she threw herself straight onto the lawn, face down, and stayed there. For a moment, no one knew what to do. She just lay there, sprawled on the ground, breathing hard. The neighbors started whispering among themselves. Some people were already holding up their cell phones, probably filming. And then she started to crawl. Yes, crawling. Like a wounded soldier trying to flee the battlefield, she crawled across the lawn, grumbling, huffing, completely exhausted. And it was at that moment that her husband finally decided to show up. He opened the door very slowly, first peeking out to see if the wasps were still loose in the house. When he realized that his wife had left, he breathed a sigh of relief, and only then stepped outside. But instead of running to help her, he just stood there, watching, without doing anything. The woman, who had already been attacked, humiliated, and was now dragging herself in front of half the neighborhood, looked at him with pure hatred. It was the first time she had said anything audible in the midst of that outburst. "You left me in there!" Her husband's response was the best possible. He shrugged. "I did. Would. As if to say, what could I do? That was the last straw." The woman jumped up, even though she was in pain, and went over to him. Now it was no longer the wasps that were hunting her. It was her. The guy, realizing the danger, took 2 steps back and tried to argue. But it was too late. The woman started shouting at him in front of everyone. "You left me to die in there!" "I was trying to save myself." "Trying to save yourself? You bastard!" And then came the most satisfying moment of the night. She raised her hand and slapped him on the arm. Nothing hard, nothing that really hurt, but enough to make him cringe. Enough for the neighbors to become even more interested in the drama. The HOA? Still completely silent, perhaps because they knew that there was no possible argument to defend this woman. After all, how does one defend oneself after stealing a package and being punished by vengeful wasps? The woman, realizing that her public fight was getting more and more ridiculous, finally gave up. She turned her back and walked back into the house, but not before giving her husband one last deadly look. He, for his part, just stood there, seeming to wonder why he was still married. The neighbors, one by one, began to disperse, but not without a few giggles. I just stood by, watching my revenge unfold even better than I had imagined. Because now, as well as being covered in stings, humiliated in front of everyone, and having her house invaded by an angry swarm, she had managed to destroy her own marriage. And that was the part I didn't even have to plan. But I knew she wasn't going to accept this defeat in silence. Because that kind of person doesn't know how to lose. So, of course, I was already waiting for the next attack. The silence lasted exactly 2 days. 2 days of pure quiet. 2 days with no complaints, no stupid HOA tickets, no gossipy neighbor sticking her nose in where it didn't belong. 2 days where she, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, hid inside her own house, licking her wounds, literally. But I knew that these kinds of people don't know how to lose. And of course, I was right. On the morning of the 3rd day, when I went out to get my coffee on the balcony, there it was, a thick envelope of letterhead with the HOA logo stamped on the front. The smell of trouble was so strong that it almost made me choke. I opened it right there, without ceremony, and began to read. Notice of violation, destructive behavior in the community, residential security threat. This woman really had no limits. In short, the HOA was fining me for creating a hazardous situation that resulted in physical and emotional harm to a resident of the neighborhood. Yes, I was being fined because she opened a package she herself stole and was attacked by the consequences of the crime itself. The audacity! I could have gotten angry. I could have called the HOA right then and there and told them to go to hell, but that would have been boring. And I don't like being boring. I like giving back. So instead of answering right away, I went straight to my laptop, and there, in the files from my security camera, was everything I needed. Video of the thief taking my package. Video of the thief running away from vengeful wasps. Video of the thief being abandoned by her husband on the doorstep. A real soap opera. All I needed now was an audience. And that's why, that very night, I did something I knew couldn't be ignored. I sent an email to all HOA members with the subject line, "About my notice of violation, evidence attached." And inside the email, the videos, every angle, every detail, along with a very simple message. Dear HOA members, it seems there has been a mistake. I am being fined for a hazardous situation that I supposedly caused. But, as you can see from the attached videos, the real violation was committed by someone else. If there is any attempt to uphold this fine, I will take the appropriate legal action. Oh, and before I forget, I've already sent this same email to some neighbors who have also had packages mysteriously disappear in recent months. I thought they'd like to know who was really behind it. Me, the person who just wanted to receive their packages in peace. The shipment was made. Now all I had to do was sit back and wait. And I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, the whole neighborhood was talking about it. The video had leaked. And not only leaked, it went viral within the community. I found out about it when I went out to get the paper, and a neighbor gave me a complicit smile. Bro, you destroyed it. On the sidewalk, two women were whispering to each other while looking in the direction of her house. Her? Well, she never showed up. For the first time in months, the queen of the HOA didn't go out to inspect anything. She didn't pick up the mail. She didn't sweep the sidewalk. She didn't knock on anyone's door. She just disappeared. Even the HOA, which had always been complicit in this woman's antics, had to admit that there was nothing they could do to save her this time. Late that afternoon, a formal email arrived from the association. After reassessing the facts, we have decided to annul the erroneously imposed fine. We apologize for the inconvenience. Translation: we took a dump in an attempt to screw you over, and now everyone knows. But the best was yet to come. A week later, the HOA announced a special meeting. The subject? Removal of the current leadership. Yes, she was being removed from office. The whole neighborhood already knew she was a walking joke. The decision was unanimous. She was no longer the president of the HOA, and from that day on, no one ever heard from her again. 2 weeks later, a moving truck pulled up in front of the house. She and her husband packed up and disappeared from the neighborhood. For good. And what about me? Well, never again did a single package disappear from my balcony. But just in case, I put a notice on the door. Caution. Some deliveries may contain unwanted surprises, just to make sure no one else made the same mistake. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.